"Mr. Alexander, don't drink that. Her fiancé put something in the glass." Kesha Washington's scream cut through the elegant silence of the main hall like thunder on a clear day. 50 guests in tuxedos and designer gowns froze instantly. Alexander. Sterling, a 42-year-old billionaire, stopped with a glass of Dom Perignon champagne inches from his lips. Victoria Blackwood, his flawless fiancée, turned pale as if she had seen a ghost. At the entrance to the hall stood the 35-year-old cleaning lady, still holding her bucket, shaking like a leaf, but her eyes locked on the golden glass sparkling beneath the crystal chandeliers. "What did you say?" Alexander slowly lowered the glass, his deep voice echoing through the marble and mahogany room. Victoria reacted first, leaping from her chair with practiced elegance. "Darling, pay no attention to this person. She has clearly lost her mind. Security!" Her voice was firm, but Kesha noticed the almost imperceptible tremor in Victoria's perfectly manicured hands. The silence was so heavy that the faint clinking of abandoned silver cutlery echoed in the air. Some guests whispered indignantly about the audacity of a mere employee interrupting the most important business dinner of the year. Kesha took a deep breath. She had spent 12 years cleaning the mansions of Manhattan's elite, always invisible, always ignored. But in recent weeks, she had overheard fragments of conversations that chilled her blood. Whispered phone calls, secret meetings. Strange. Bottles appearing and disappearing from the kitchen. "I saw her tampering with your glass, sir," Kesha said, her voice steadier now. "And I found strange things hidden in her room." Victoria let out a crystalline laugh, but her eyes shot invisible daggers at the cleaning lady. "Alexander, love, this woman clearly has mental problems. Perhaps it's time we reviewed our hiring criteria." 2 security guards stepped forward, but Alexander raised his hand, stopping them. His piercing blue eyes flickered between the fiancé he had loved for 3 years and the employee who had just made an unthinkable accusation. What no one in that room knew was that Kesha Washington was not just an ordinary cleaning lady. With a degree in chemistry from Howard University, she had been forced to abandon her career after a false accusation of theft at her previous laboratory. Now, working in the shadows, her scientific knowledge had found a purpose she never imagined. 4. A moment that stretched into eternity. The fate of 3 lives hung in the air like smoke. Alexander looked at the glass, then at Victoria, then at Kesha. The woman who had always been treated like furniture now stood at the center of a drama that would soon make headlines across the country. "Please, sir," Kesha whispered, tears glistening in her eyes but unwavering determination in her posture. "Just don't drink it." And in that instant, Alexander Sterling realized that his luxurious life, built on million-dollar contracts and strategic alliances, was about to collapse in a way even his best lawyers could not prevent. The question echoing in his mind was simple and terrifying. Could it be possible that the woman he loved was trying to kill him? What happened next would decide not only who would live or die, but which version of the truth would prevail in this silent war between 2 women from completely opposite worlds. If you're wondering how a simple cleaning lady had the courage to stand up against New York's most powerful elite, subscribe to the channel, because this story of justice is just beginning. The silence in the hall was deafening. 50 of New York's most powerful businessmen watched the scene as though they were in a thriller, unsure whether to laugh at the absurdity or call their lawyers. Victoria Blackwood laughed again, louder this time, turning to the guests like an actress commanding her stage. "Look at this ridiculous situation. A cleaning lady trying to ruin the most important moment of our lives with delusional fantasies." Alexander still held his glass, his piercing eyes fixed on Kesha. "What kind of strange things did you find?" His voice was calm, betraying neither belief nor doubt. "Small bottles hidden in her bathroom cabinet," Kesha replied, ignoring the hostile stares. "Liquids that are neither perfume nor medicine. And yesterday, I heard her on the phone, talking about solving the Alexander problem once and for all." Victoria faltered for a split second before regaining her composure. How absurd. Alexander, darling, she's clearly making up stories for attention. Perhaps she has undiagnosed mental health issues. The words struck Kesha like a knife. 12 years earlier, while working at a prestigious pharmaceutical laboratory in Boston, her supervisors had dismissed her findings about irregularities in drug trials with the same phrase. Maybe you're imagining things. Maybe you need help. 2 weeks later, $500,000 worth of research materials disappeared from the lab. Kesha was accused of theft, summarily fired and blacklisted. Her scientific career had ended before it truly began. I'm not crazy, Kesha said, her voice rising, with conviction. And I know chemical compounds when I see them. I've been cleaning rich people's homes for 12 years, and I've learned one thing. You always underestimate those you consider inferior. An indignant murmur rippled through the crowd. How dare she insult us, whispered a socialite to her neighbor. Victoria seized on their outrage. Do you see? This woman clearly has deep resentment towards successful people. Alexander, honey, call security now before she does something dangerous. Kesha, Alexander said quietly, using her first name for the first time in 12 years. Are you absolutely sure about what you're saying? The question carried immense weight. Kesha knew her answer would determine not only the fate of that evening, but possibly the rest of her life. If she was wrong, she would be sued, arrested, destroyed, forever. If she was right but couldn't prove it, I am Mr. Sterling, she replied firmly, and I can prove it. Victoria let out a hysterical laugh. Prove it? How? With what evidence? Do you really believe that? A simple cleaning lady? She didn't finish the sentence, but the contempt in her voice was crystal clear. It was then that Kesha noticed something no one else had. Victoria was sweating discreetly despite the powerful air conditioning in the room. Her hands, usually so perfectly controlled, trembled slightly as she held her glass of water. More importantly, she had not specifically denied the existence of the vials. Mr. Sterling, Kesha said calmly, Miss Victoria did not deny having the vials. She only said my allegations were absurd. Silence once again filled the room. All eyes turned to Victoria, waiting for a direct and categorical denial. Victoria hesitated for 2 seconds. Just 2, but enough for Alexander to notice. Of course. I deny it, she exclaimed at last. What a ridiculous question. But the hesitation had already been seen by several people. Mr. Patterson, a real estate mogul and close friend of Alexander's, leaned over and whispered something into his ear. Kesha took a deep breath. For years she had observed the powerful, in their most vulnerable moments, cleaning their homes while they thought they were alone. She had learned to read body language, to identify lies, to sense when someone was hiding secrets. Most importantly, she had learned that the powerful always underestimated those they considered invisible. May I suggest something, Mr. Sterling? Kesha said, her voice now carrying a confidence that surprised everyone. How about we ask someone to go up to Miss Victoria's room and check the bathroom cabinet, bottom drawer, right side, behind the imported hair products? The specificity of the location made Alexander raise his eyebrows. Victoria, for her part, was visibly shaken. That's an invasion of privacy. I won't allow an employee to dictate the rules of my own home. It's not your home yet, Alexander said coldly. And if Kesha is lying, it will be easy to prove. If she is telling the truth... He let the sentence hang, heavy with menace. At that moment, Kesha Washington knew she had crossed a line of no return. But unlike 12 years ago when she had been a naive young scientist, she was now prepared for the war that would follow, because during all those years of cleaning houses, watching, being treated like furniture, she had learned something Victoria Blackwood would never understand. Sometimes being underestimated is the greatest advantage anyone can have, and while Victoria wasted her energy trying to humiliate her publicly, Kesha kept her most powerful card hidden. A 23-minute recording that would turn this night into a nightmare Victoria would never forget. The tension in the hall was palpable. Victoria tried to regain control of the situation, gliding gracefully among the guests like a queen defending her territory. "Just look at the absurd situation we're in," she said, gesturing theatrically. "A domestic worker trying to teach chemistry to people who have built empires." The guests' nervous laughter echoed through the room. Mr. Patterson whispered to his neighbor, "How embarrassing for Alexander. How can he allow a maid to cause such a scandal?" Alexander remained motionless, studying both women. His business mind, sharpened by million-dollar negotiations, detected conflicting signals. Victoria was sweating far more than usual. Kesha, on the other hand, remained unnervingly calm for someone making such a grave accusation. "Mr. Sterling," Kesha said evenly, "may I ask Miss Victoria a simple question?" "Absolutely not," Victoria exclaimed before Alexander could respond. "I will not submit to questioning by a maid." The vehement refusal caught the attention of several guests. Why would Victoria fear simple questions if she had nothing to hide? Kesha took another deep breath. 12 years of cleaning mansions had taught her the same lesson over and over. The powerful always made one mistake. They completely underestimated those they considered inferior. "Very well," she said. "Then let me share what I've discovered over the past 15 days. 15 days? Alexander raised his eyebrows. "Yes, sir. That's when I began noticing strange patterns." Kesha walked slowly across the room, ignoring the hostile stares. Phone calls at the exact same time, always when you were away. Chemicals appearing and disappearing from the kitchen, and most notably Miss Victoria asking very specific questions about your eating habits. Victoria let out a hysterical laugh. "Questions about eating habits? I'm his fiancée. It's natural for me to be interested in his health." "It's natural," Kesha agreed. "But it's not natural to ask specifically about intolerances to certain chemicals, precise meal times, and whether you have a habit of sharing food with others." The silence that followed was deafening. Alexander felt a chill run down his spine. He vaguely remembered Victoria asking exactly those questions, always casually, always disguised as loving concern. Then something unexpected happened. Dr. Marcus Henderson, a renowned toxicologist and one of the guests present, slowly stood up. "Excuse me," he said, adjusting his glasses, "but those are exactly the questions a poisoner would ask to calculate precise dosages." Victoria paled. "Dr. Henderson, you can't be serious." "Actually," he continued, looking at Kesha, "I'm very interested in the chemical knowledge demonstrated by— What was your name again?" "Kesha Washington, doctor," she replied steadily. "And thank you for asking my name. Most people here never bother." Alexander watched the exchange with growing fascination. There was something about Kesha's demeanor that didn't fit with a simple cleaning lady. The way she used scientific terminology, how she maintained direct eye contact, and how she stayed calm under intense pressure. Dr. Henderson approached her. "You mentioned recognizing chemical compounds. What kind of training do you have?" Victoria tried to interrupt. "Doctor, please, let's not give any more attention to this chemistry." "Howard University, class of 2007, Kesha replied simply. "I worked in a pharmaceutical lab for 3 years before—" She hesitated. "Before certain circumstances forced me to change careers." The room erupted in surprised murmurs. A trained chemist, now working as a cleaning lady. The story didn't add up, and everyone could tell. Alexander stepped forward. "What kind of circumstances?" "I was falsely accused of theft after discovering irregularities in drug testing," Kesha said, her voice heavy with old pain. "My scientific career ended overnight. I was blacklisted from the industry. Dr. Henderson nodded gravely. I know these cases well. The pharmaceutical industry does not tolerate whistleblowers. He turned to Alexander. Mr. Sterling, if I may suggest, perhaps we should hear what Dr. Washington has to say. Dr. Washington? Alexander repeated, testing the words. Do you have a doctorate? Master's degree in analytical chemistry, specializing in toxicology, Kesha replied. I spent 12 years cleaning houses because it was the only work I could find. But I never stopped being a scientist. Victoria was visibly panicked. This is ridiculous. You're going to believe stories made up by a what? By a qualified scientist making observations based on evidence, Dr. Henderson interrupted coldly. Kesha seized the moment. Mr. Sterling, Victoria didn't just ask suspicious questions, she also received mysterious deliveries, always when you were traveling, always delivered by men in unmarked cars. That's a lie, Victoria shouted. Last Wednesday, October 16th, at 3:15 p.m., Kesha continued calmly. A Caucasian man, approximately 40 years old, driving a black sedan with a partially covered license plate. The delivery was made at the back entrance. Length of meeting, 27 minutes. The specificity of the details made Alexander recoil inwardly. Either Kesha was making it all up with uncanny creativity, or she had been observing and documenting everything. How do you know all this? Alexander asked. Because after 12 years of being treated as invisible, I've learned that powerful people do questionable things when they believe no one is watching. Kesha turned her gaze directly on Victoria. And because, for the past 15 days, I've been documenting everything. Victoria tried one last gambit. Alexander, dear, are you really going to let a resentful maid destroy our relationship with paranoid fantasies? But Alexander was no longer looking at Victoria. His eyes were fixed on Kesha, and on his face was something new. Respect. What kind of documentation? Kesha smiled for the first time that evening. It wasn't a smile of joy, but of someone, finally revealing carefully guarded cards, photographs, audio recordings, chemical analyses of the vials I found, and, most importantly, she paused dramatically. A 23-minute recording of a very enlightening phone conversation. Victoria's blood seemed to freeze in her veins. What recording? The one from last Sunday when you were playing golf, Kesha replied calmly. When you spoke to someone named Tony about speeding up the schedule and making sure nothing was left for further investigation. Victoria staggered as if struck. Several guests exchanged looks, beginning to understand the true gravity of the situation. Dr. Henderson stepped closer to Alexander. Mr. Sterling, I strongly suggest you don't drink anything until this situation is completely clarified. Alexander nodded and placed his glass firmly on the table. Kesha, he said, using her first name for the second time. Where is this evidence? In a safe place, she replied, and copies have already been sent to trusted individuals in case anything happens to me. It was at that moment Victoria Blackwood realized she had completely underestimated her opponent. The simple cleaning lady was in fact a trained scientist, a meticulous investigator, and a strategist who had spent 15 days gathering irrefutable evidence. While Victoria desperately tried to think of a way out, Kesha remained calm, knowing her most powerful card had not yet been revealed. Because the 23-minute recording didn't just show Victoria conspiring, it revealed something far worse, something that would turn that night into a nightmare Victoria could never have imagined. What no one in that room yet suspected was that Kesha Washington wasn't merely defending Alexander Sterling's life. She was about to expose a web of corruption reaching far beyond that mansion. A conspiracy that would involve names destined to dominate headlines for months. And it would all begin with a simple question. A question that would force Victoria to publicly confess to crimes she didn't even know she had already admitted. The silence in the room was so thick it seemed to press down on everyone. Victoria was visibly trembling now, her perfectly manicured, hands damp with cold sweat, The mention of the recording with Tony had shattered her composure. "What recording?" Alexander repeated, his voice low but laden with authority that made every guest lean forward. Kesha took a deep breath, knowing the next few minutes would determine not only the fate of the evening, but perhaps the rest of her life. "Mr. Sterling," she said steadily, "in 12 years of cleaning the homes of the elite, I've learned that powerful people commit their worst crimes when they believe they are alone." "Alexander, you can't be serious," Victoria cried desperately. "She's just a disgruntled employee trying to—" "Shut up, Victoria," Alexander said coldly, never taking his eyes off Kesha. "Continue." Kesha took a small digital recorder out of her apron pocket. "Last Sunday, October 21st, 3:17 p.m., Miss Victoria was in her office, door closed, talking to someone named Antonio Rossetti. The name caused several guests to exchange uneasy glances. Rossetti was known in business circles as a problem solver, a man who made problems disappear for substantial sums of money. "I've never heard of this man," Victoria lied desperately, but her voice faltered on the last word. Dr. Henderson stepped forward. "May I examine that tape recorder?" Kesha handed the device to him. The doctor plugged in headphones and listened for a few seconds. His expression changed dramatically. "Mr. Sterling, I suggest everyone hear this." Alexander nodded, and Kesha connected the recorder to a portable sound system she had brought. Victoria's clear voice filled the room. "Tony, I need you to speed up the schedule. Alexander is getting suspicious about the funds I transferred. To the Cayman Islands? Yes, I know it's risky, but if he finds out about the 12 million, I'm done for." "No, he can't just disappear. It has to look natural. A heart attack, perhaps. Did you make sure the substance leaves no trace?" The room exploded with exclamations of shock. Some guests stood abruptly, others covered their mouths in horror. Alexander turned pale as a sheet. The recording continued. "Perfect. And after he dies, how long will it take for me to have full access to the assets? Great. Are the fake will documents ready? Excellent. In a week, the entire Sterling fortune will be his." Victoria tried to run for the door, but 2 security guards had already positioned themselves to block her. This is a montage," she screamed hysterically. "It's digital technology. It can be faked." Kesha smiled with genuine satisfaction. "Interesting that you mentioned digital technology." She pulled a tablet out of her cleaning bucket. High-resolution photographs appeared on the screen. Victoria meeting a middle-aged man at the back entrance of the mansion. Clear timestamps showed dates and times. In one photo, Victoria handed over an envelope thick with cash. "This is Antonio Rossetti," Kesha explained calmly. "Also known as Tony. In New York criminal circles, he's a specialist in deaths that appear natural." Dr. Henderson examined the photos, his face grave. "Mr. Sterling, as a physician, I must inform you that some modern compounds can indeed simulate heart attacks without leaving detectable traces in conventional autopsies." Alexander rose slowly, his posture emanating a controlled fury that made even the guards recoil slightly. "Victoria," he said, his voice so cold it seemed to lower the temperature in the room. "You stole $12 million from my businesses." "I can explain," Victoria began, but Alexander cut her off. "And you hired a professional assassin to kill me. It's not what it looks like. To keep a fortune you never helped build." Victoria finally broke. The tears she'd were not of regret, but of rage at having been exposed. "You don't understand," she cried. 3 years pretending to love you. 3 years putting up with your boring business, your stupid meetings, your arrogant friends. I deserved that fortune." The room fell into stunned silence. The confession had been made in front of 50 of New York's elite. Kesha said nothing. She only watched with quiet dignity as Victoria publicly destroyed herself. Alexander pulled out his phone and dialed 911. "Police, please. I have an attempted murder to report, as well as theft of substantial assets." He looked directly at Victoria. "The suspect is here with me." At that moment, Victoria realized the magnitude of her downfall. Not only had she lost the fortune she craved, but she had confessed to attempted murder before dozens of influential witnesses. Her carefully cultivated social connections evaporated instantly. Mr. Patterson stood abruptly, his face pale. "Alexander, my wife and I are going to leave. This is unacceptable." Other guests followed, eager to distance themselves from the scandal. As they waited for the police, Alexander turned to Kesha. "Dr. Washington," he said, using her title for the first time, "you saved my life." "I just did what was right," she replied simply. "No." Alexander shook his head. "You did much more than that. You showed me I've spent years blind to what really matters." Victoria sat slumped in a chair, watched over by guards, muttering obsessively about how everything had been perfectly planned and how a simple cleaning lady had ruined it all. Dr. Henderson approached Kesha. "Dr. Washington, may I ask why you abandoned chemistry to work as a cleaning lady?" "I was falsely accused of theft at a pharmaceutical laboratory," she replied. "I discovered irregularities in drug testing and was silenced in the cruelest way possible." Alexander leaned closer. "Which laboratory?" "Pharmac Industries." "In Boston." Alexander raised his eyebrows. "I know the CEO, Robert Morrison. He's been one of my business contacts for years." He paused, his tone heavy with meaning. "And after what I've witnessed today, I'm certain your so-called false accusation wasn't false at all." Police sirens echoed in the distance. Victoria lifted her head, finally realizing her new reality would be prison bars, not designer dresses. "How?" she murmured, glaring at Kesha with a mix of hatred and disbelief. "How could a simple scientist—" Kesha corrected her calmly. "A simple scientist you completely underestimated. When the police arrived, they found Victoria Blackwood once, one of Manhattan's most admired socialites, being arrested for attempted murder and theft of $12 million, while her intended victim stood quietly, saved by the very woman his wife had dismissed as just a cleaning lady. What none of the guests present could have imagined was that this night would mark not only the end of Victoria's criminal career, but the beginning of an investigation that would uncover a web of corruption involving pharmaceutical companies, professional assassins, and criminal socialites, scandals that would dominate national headlines for months. And at the center of it all was the woman everyone had once treated as invisible. Kesha Washington would become the star of one of the most talked-about criminal cases of the decade, proving that sometimes justice comes from those we least expect, those with exactly the right skills to expose the truth at the right moment. 6. Months later, Victoria Blackwood had traded her designer dresses for an orange prison uniform. Sentenced to 15 years for attempted murder and fraud, she now spent her days cleaning toilets at Bedford Hills Women's Prison. The irony did not go unnoticed. The woman who had despised cleaning ladies was now one herself. "Inmate Blackwood," shouted a guard. "Your visit has been canceled. No one else ever came to see her." Her former socialite friends treated her as if she had never existed. Meanwhile, Kesha Washington was being interviewed by CNN in her new office as director of scientific investigations at Sterling Enterprises. Alexander had created the position specifically for her, recognizing that her analytical skills were exactly what his company needed. "Dr. Washington," the reporter asked, "how does it feel to be the first black woman in an executive position at Sterling Enterprises?" "I feel like I'm finally where I should have always been," Kesha replied calmly. 12 years of cleaning houses taught me more about human character than any laboratory ever could." The investigation triggered by Victoria's arrest had exposed a wider web of corruption that extended to Pharmac Industries. Robert Morrison, the CEO who had destroyed Kesha's career years earlier, now faced federal charges. Justice had finally found its way. Alexander had offered Kesha more than a job. He had offered her the chance to rebuild her life. Along with an executive salary, he created a $15 million fund for scientists who had been unfairly persecuted, ensuring that cases like hers would never be silenced again. "You saved me," Alexander said during the press conference announcing Kesha's new role. "But more than that, you taught me that true leadership means listening to the voices others prefer to ignore." From her prison cell, Victoria watched the interview on television. She saw the woman she had once despised, now hailed nationally as a symbol of integrity and perseverance. Her hands trembled when Kesha was asked about forgiveness. "I hold no grudges," Kesha answered with the same calmness she had shown on that fateful night. "People like Victoria destroy themselves. My role was simply to ensure the truth came to light." At the end of the interview, Kesha looked directly into the camera. "To anyone watching who has ever been underestimated, humiliated, or dismissed because of your background, remember this. Knowledge is power, and power used with integrity always defeats arrogance built on privilege." 2 years later, Kesha married Alexander in a simple ceremony, not out of gratitude or convenience, but because they discovered they shared the same values of justice and human dignity. Victoria, who had planned to marry Alexander for money, read the headlines from prison, realizing she had lost not only a fortune, but also the chance to know a truly worthy man. The lesson echoed through every headline, every interview, and every life touched by Kesha's example. The person you despise today may be the very one who determines your fate tomorrow. Victoria had learned the hard way that underestimating someone because of prejudice is not only morally wrong, it is strategically suicidal. While Victoria counted the days in her cell, Kesha was building a legacy that proved true. Victory doesn't come from destroying enemies, but from building something greater than they could ever imagine. Have you ever underestimated someone who later proved stronger than you thought? Share your experience in the comments and subscribe to the channel for more stories that prove justice, even when delayed, always finds its way.